Hello, welcome to Doors to Hope and Healing, an inside look at foster care and adoption needs in Connecticut. My name is Jacqueline Ford. I am humbled and honored to have worked for the Department of Children and Families for almost 30 years, and although I may be familiar with many of the topics I bring to you, I am inviting experts in those fields to share their knowledge. Joining us in the studio today is Deb Kelleher, a selfless warrior who has fostered, adopted, and devoted her career to helping children and families, starting her own nonprofit to help children in the foster care system. Hi, Deb.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
On Doors to Hope and Healing. So what I want the viewers to know about you is that you've dedicated most of your life to helping children, whether it's personally in your own life or in the professional ring with other foster care agencies and other nonprofit partners. So let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I guess the most important thing that I always want to lead with is that I'm an adoptive mom to 3 boys, as well as a mom to 1 child that I had biologically. My boys are all adults now, so that's very exciting for me, and I have 4 grandkids, which is even more exciting. I adopted them all through the Connecticut foster care system. My oldest adopted child, Joel, which, by the way, I never refer to them as adopted except in situations like this, is 31 and married, which is really fun for him. And my next one, Zach, is 21, and my youngest, Damon, is 19. We are our own little band.
That's cute.
Yeah.
And what made you decide that you wanted to foster in the protective service system?
So back in 1989, another lifetime ago, I was doing some research because I always knew that I wanted to foster and adopt, except I thought it was going to be a long time, except I wasn't able to have any more kids, so my plans changed, and I always called my classroom time my surrogate pregnancy because it actually took 9 months from the time I started class till the time we had my son placed with us. So we identified Joel from what used to be called the Care Book, which would now be your Heart Gallery. I still have his little write-up. I keep it. Yep. And we picked him out from there, and then we went to visit the DCF office because they considered him a child that they really had some real significant concerns about because he had some medical issues. And there was a whole bunch of folks in the office who wanted to meet us. And at the end of the meeting, they said, well, go home and think about it. And I remember turning to my husband, and we looked at each other, and I said, well, how long do we have to think about it? And they said, why? And I said, because we'll call you as soon as you say we can, because we already know we want him. So Joel was then placed with us, and took about, if I recall, about 2 years, and his adoption was finalized. Unfortunately, my marriage didn't last, but I decided that I really wanted to do it again. And in the meantime, I had begun to teach classes with the private agency that we had been licensed through. And I taught classes for over 10 years. And during that time, I realized that that was what I wanted to spend my life doing, was working in the foster care system. So, and then I got licensed again twice, and I ended up with 2 more boys, despite the fact that I had asked for a girl.
How old was Joel when you adopted him?
Joel was about 4 or 5 by the time our adoption was finalized. He was 3 when he was placed with us.
And what about your other 2 boys?
So Zach was 6 months old, and my youngest, Damon, was a preemie who had lots of medical issues, and he was 8 weeks old when he came home to us. I remember telling people that he would fit from here to here on my arm because he was so tiny. Yeah, he was really tiny. Now he's got a black belt in karate, and he's as tall as I am, and he's got a deep voice and beard and a mustache. So
strong and loved and well nurtured, I'm
Yes.
sure. Before we get into the work that you're doing in your career, talk to us a little bit about that story that you've shared with me about uniting the brothers together, your adopted child's brother.
Yes. So So it actually has to do with the work too. So I was down in Norwalk working an event at Pride in the Park looking to recruit foster and adoptive families. And a DCF worker was coming to meet me there to provide me with some materials. And I had never met him before. However, we had emailed each other. So he and I met, and I always took those opportunities to ask people at DCF if they knew my kids' families, because I never felt like I knew enough about where they came from and who they were, and I always wanted to have that information to be able to share with them. And when I asked him whether he had known my child's mom, he grabbed my arm and said, you all need to excuse us, pulled me aside and said, "You do know that I have your son's brother." And I said, I couldn't understand what he meant, because I knew that the kids had been adopted, so I wasn't sure what he meant. And I said to him, "What are you talking about?" And he said that unfortunately his adoption had not worked out, and he had been his worker when the child was very, very young. And because of that, he asked to become his foster parent. Oh. So he became my son's brother's foster parent, and he had him. And I started to cry because we had no contact with him after the adoption was finalized. We were told that the family did not want to promote contact. So we had thought that the kids would never know each other. And we decided to get the kids together immediately. And
what were the ages of the boys at this time?
17 and 19.
Wow.
No, 17 and 18, because the boys are only 10 months apart.
Wow.
So we started texting each other with pictures of the kids and talking to the kids about how we had found their brother and stuff. And the kids got really excited. And then we do an event through our agency every year at Quasi, where we often have kids get back together with their siblings. And we both thought that that would be a great opportunity for the boys to meet each other again, where they'd have something to do in case they were uncomfortable with each other. Mm-hmm. So we just, that day, the boys got to see each other, and we, sent them off on their merry way to go on the rides together. While the boys were gone, he said to me, "Do you know where Mom is buried? Because my son wants to pay his respects." And Mom had died in 2007. And I said, "No, but I think the Adoption Assistance Program can help us find her." And so they did. I gave them a copy of the obituary, and the worker called the funeral home. And the most surprising thing was that the funeral director called her back within like 15 minutes and said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but no one ever picked up Mom's cremains, and she's still here to this day." That was in 2017.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that must have been so powerful for the boys. How did they handle that?
Well, we didn't tell them that until we knew what would happen, because we were worried that they'd feel that their mom wasn't well taken care of. So we worked with the funeral director, and she had also been adopted by her stepfather. And it's funny how small the world of adoption is.
It sure is.
And she said that she could not see just handing us the cremains, and she insisted upon doing a 10-year memorial service where we invited the pediatrician who had been there when both boys were born, the staff from DCF who had been part of their mom's case and their cases. And we had one member from DCF who has a fabulous voice who sang Ave Maria for us. And we did that 10-year memorial service for the boys. In the meantime, their other brother, whom I am in touch with periodically, got in touch with me. And we invited him to the service also. And he showed up with his baby. And it was the first time that all three boys were ever in the same room together. We took a picture of them, and it was the first time the boys obviously were meeting their nephew.
Wow, what a remarkable story. Their life came full circle.
It did.
And are they all in touch with one another now?
Unfortunately, their older brother is incarcerated now, which often happens to kids who age out, as you know. But the two younger boys are in touch with each other, and the foster dad and I are in touch. Recently, they came to our town. We all had dinner together, and he and I keep in touch all the time. And there was an event recently that my son's brother was at, so I got to hug him and say hi and all of that. So yeah, we do. We keep in touch. I'm just thrilled that the boys have this opportunity to get to know each other again.
It is, and the sibling connection and that bond is just a remarkable bond that really should be fostered whenever possible.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that, because when the boys were walking away from us at Quasi for the first time, both foster dad and I turned to each other and looked at each other and said, it's remarkable how similar they are. They walked the same way. As they were talking, they used their hands the same way. The way they inflect in their language is exactly the same. It's so amazing how similar they are, despite the fact that they were not raised together.
And for so many years. I mean, almost, all through their teens.
Yes.
So now you and I had done a lot of work together years ago with the community collaboratives that were all across Connecticut. We had different community collaboratives in all the different regions of DCF. Can you talk a little bit about your work there that led you into opening or starting your own
Absolutely.
nonprofit?
So we actually still have our community collaborative. I believe we might be the last one left in Connecticut. We serve all of northwestern Connecticut, so Greater Waterbury, Danbury, and Torrington. At first, we were doing it with me just working individually on behalf of the collaborative and as a liaison to DCF, doing the work of recruiting foster families and supporting them. And then it just became clear that if we wanted to get grants, if we wanted to do any other kind of work, if we wanted to do some of the work that I found near and dear to my heart, that we needed to form a nonprofit. So that's what we did. So back in 2011, we started the work, and by 2014, we had our nonprofit status, and we transferred the work over to the nonprofit, which is named for my grandmother. So it's called Annie C. Courtney Foundation. My grandmother is Anna Carolina Goodlonis Courtney. Courtney was her married name, but she never went by the Goodlonis, so we didn't include that. The reason we named it after my grandmother was because my grandmother was one of the original kinship caregivers. My grandmother was the oldest of 7, and both of her parents died when she was between 15 and 16 years old. And back in those days, in the 1920s, it was very common then for even a young, what we would consider a child now, to finish raising the rest of the family. And that's what she did. She stopped going to school, and she stayed at home, and she raised all of her brothers and sisters. By the time she was done, she was considered unmarriageable, because back then, if you were over like 20, nobody supposedly wanted to marry you.
Wow.
My grandfather did, and she ended up with 4 kids, and she's always been my hero. Was a very, very heroic, very brave person who my 6'4" father was deathly frightened of this 5 tall woman. So so she's always been my hero. She's taught me everything.
So what a legacy that she's left, and what an honor to have this foundation named in her name. So what is what's the mission of your foundation?
So our mission is to support foster, adoptive, and kinship families. And our long-term goal is to create a community where families can live intergenerationally with senior citizens. There's one similar to this in Massachusetts, which I've been to visit, which I found so incredibly inspiring. So the idea is to have active senior citizens live in a community with foster adoptive families and kids who've aged out at a ratio of 3 to 1, where there are 3 seniors to every 1 household that has our identified community. Therefore, providing the kind of natural supports that families need to be successful. Because we all know that, that our families never can have enough support, because our kids have experienced such trauma, and clinical support doesn't always do it. You really need those natural supports that you build into your life in order to feel like there's enough people there in a child's life to support them.
Sure. And what this model is from another state that runs a similar program?
So actually the original model is called Generations of Hope, and it's from out in the Midwest. And then the Treehouse Foundation in Massachusetts has imitated it. There are numerous examples of this across the United States. It's done with wounded warriors. That model is down in Louisiana, and it pairs returning wounded veterans with retired military families. There's one in Washington, D.C. that pairs pregnant and parenting girls, mostly from the Department of Children and Families down there, with seniors. And there's another one, I can't remember where exactly right now, that pairs families interested in supporting people with disabilities with folks with disabilities. So it's an amazing model that really does that, that kind of old neighborhood feel that we all grew up in, that is really not as prevalent in, this day and age of constant moving and people,
transient lifestyles.
Yes.
So how do you get started in identifying a community, and what are your steps? What steps have you taken to implement this?
So we are engaged in being a part of every community group that we can think of that has anything to do with affordable housing and developing housing in the state of Connecticut. And then we've been searching for property that we feel might be useful and that we can either get donated to us or that we can figure out how to access. The agency up in Massachusetts who did this, one of the things that they did was they partnered with a HUD developer, and the HUD developer actually purchased the property, and they just act as the social service agency for the community, which would be my preference, because we don't really need to be landlords or folks out there worrying about people's roofs. We need to be more concerned with folks being able to grow and develop and be happy in their communities.
And staying focused on your mission without any mission creeping.
Yes.
So Deb, we only have 2 minutes left, or even less than 2 minutes now. Before we end, can you just tell us real quickly about the video that you just developed and the challenge and the hashtag, because we are going to be showing that shortly, but I just want you to give a little bit of a
Absolutely.
explanation.
So the video is called Change the World. We, as part of our community collaborative, we were trying to think of additional ways to get the world to notice our kids and the need we have for more families across the United States. And we thought about the lip sync challenge that a lot of police departments have done across the United States and how successful that was for them. And we came up with our own challenge. So it's hashtag foster care challenge. And we started by doing our music video, and we've already thrown down the challenge to Rhode Island, and Rhode Island has taken it up. At the NACAC conference this past week, North American Council for Adoptable Children, the video debuted, and a number of states expressed interest in also being a part of the challenge. So we're very, very excited.
It's very exciting and unprecedented for sure, and I had a chance to see it myself, so I'm very excited to have the viewers see it. So thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll definitely like to have you back on to Doors to Hope and Healing. Thank you for watching this segment of Doors to Hope and Healing. We join Deb Kelleher with the belief that we can help change the world for children in need. As we close, we leave you with the music video. If you or someone you know is interested in fostering or adopting a Connecticut child, please call 1-888-KID-HERO. Thank you.
With it hope, with a family that stepped in to care for me when they knew that I needed it most. They've helped me through struggles with kindness and love, and I no longer feel so alone. But deep down I know there are others like me who could use the love I've been shown. You can change the world for kids like me who need to feel whole. A helping hand to cross the road that's been harder than it has been foremost. All it takes is lots of love and a safe place to call home. Will you be a foster family? and unknown. When I looked in his eyes, somehow I just knew that I had to give him a home. The simple things so many kids are denied. As I thought about it, I cried. And I knew in that moment I had the strength to the occasion I would rise. I could change the world for a kid like him who needs to feel whole. A helping hand to cross a road that's been harder than it has been for most. All it takes is lots of love and a safe place to call home. We will be foster family. These children come from many different places, from different lives with different situations. They need our help just for a time, and we can help rebuild their lives if we just try. So sing it loud for everyone to hear. We need foster homes to help thousands of kids each year. So open up your hearts and open up your minds when you look inside. You'll find that we can change.